Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss my thoughts on PMQs as usual, as Sunak came under fire for the second week in a row over his handling of asylum and immigration, with particular focus on the Rwanda plan. If anything, this was even worse for Sunak than last week, and this is all before the all-important vote tonight. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I said last week, that I was caught out by Starmer choosing to go with asylum and immigration with his questions. This is most unlike a Labour leader. But there was no surprise at all this week. With the Rwanda plan eating up all of the political focus, it was obvious. It was also that rare beast, especially these days, of a PMQs where both the Labour and SNP leaders were directing their questions in parallel with one another, which is never coordinated, obviously. So a sign that it's a major weakness for the Tories. And today, Starmer spent his first 4 questions asking basically the same question. It's not just that he, for the second week in a row, used his questions to ask about asylum and immigration, traditionally the Tory safe place, and an issue that Labour would just rather manage quietly. It's that he asked the exact same question multiple times. And this won't be because he couldn't think of anything else, but because he knows it's a really bad question for the Tories, for all important voters, including the Reform UK voters that Sunak is desperately chasing after, as well as quite a lot of backbenchers. And the question referred to about, I think it was 85% of all the asylum seekers being earmarked for deportation to Rwanda have gone missing, absconded. The government don't know where they are, and they've had to admit it. So Starmer asked Sunak if he'd found them yet. Bizarrely, in answering the question, Sunak described his asylum plan as working. Working? Okay, so the plan is to have asylum seekers abscond inside the UK, is it then? To have asylum seekers in Britain completely out of sight of the authorities. Has he told his party this? Because I reckon they'd have a few objections to this policy. At one point, he brought out a book written by Keir Starmer on European human rights laws. A breach of the rules for which the Speaker admonished him, you're not allowed to use props. But I wonder which of his clueless advisors put him up to that. Was it the same one who said, Prime Minister, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to film you not wearing a seatbelt in a moving car and broadcast it to the nation. It'd be the same one, I reckon. Highlighting the fact that Keir Starmer was not just a successful lawyer, but such an authority on his specialist subject that he has a book which is required reading. The extent to which the Tories are desperately trying to attack Starmer's career as a lawyer by pointing out how good he was at it is, as I said when they announced the strategy a few weeks ago, a very high risk one. It's a huge gamble which is not on current evidence really working for them. Certainly Starmer feels no threat from this line of attack because he didn't even bother to address it. Like he could have talked about the cab rank rule again when Sunak mentioned Starmer's role in representing a group which the government have this week prescribed. And Starmer went with this same question 4 times, and it's always very powerful when you can do that. It's about, for those who remember who've watched British politics for a very, very long time, grilling Michael Howard on whether or not he'd threatened to overrule someone, and Michael Howard, I didn't overrule anyone. No, did you threaten to overrule? And it went on and made Michael Howard look very, very foolish. Can be very powerful. But the question has to meet 2 criteria. First, it has to be a question which is incredibly important to key voters, or to the Prime Minister or party leaders' own MPs. They have to think it's an important question as well. And second, it has to be one which that Prime Minister dare not answer. Because by repeating the question, you emphasise the fact that the Prime Minister is not wanting to answer. It's not that they can't answer. Of course they can. It's a yes or no question. Have you found them yet? No, we haven't. Or, well, we found so many of them, but not the others. Like, it's easy to answer. He doesn't want to answer. Why doesn't he want to answer? Because the answer's really bad. No, we haven't found them. Thousands of asylum seekers absconded, and the government are unable to say when or even if they will ever be able to track them down again. And the beauty of these questions today, or should I say this question repeated 4 times, was that it wasn't just there to make Rishi Sunak uncomfortable, but for those on the far right as well. See, I often talk about how Sunak has painted himself into a corner, but it's squeaky bum time for the far right as well. Their amendments are not supported. So they were never going to be supported. So they have to vote on the bill tonight in a form which they have noisily and publicly said cannot actually work. Now, they can't afford for the bill to actually be voted down. that would be to sink their own flagship policy, make the entire party look foolish, and effectively end the government's only major policy left to implement. Because the far right have worked to force Rishi Sunak to expend so much political capital on this one policy that if they sink it, they've got nothing left. It would be utterly self-defeating unless they intended to replace Sunak in short order, but they can't agree on who that should be. So they need to see the bill pass. It's the lesser of all evils for them. But no individual wants to be seen as responsible for it passing. But the opposition are going to vote against it. So they have to. If they vote in favour of a bill which they claim can't work, they look both stupid and weak at the same time, because it looks like Sunak's faced them down. He hasn't, of course, but that's what it looks like. So they need enough Tory MPs to vote in favour of it that it overcomes all the opposition MPs and goes through. They just don't individually want their own name showing up on the records as having been part of it. And this is why Sky's Beth Rigby was saying last night that although the bill was, of course, expected to pass, there's a small chance that Tory rebels could bring down the government by mistake. Because the safest course of action is to not vote against it, but abstain. That way, in theory, you can have twice as many MPs not support it without risking the collapse of their own government. But abstaining looks weak on a bill which they claim can't work. Like, there are lots of occasions to abstain, perfectly reasonably. You could, if there's a bill, for example, you go, okay, it does this, this and this, and we approve of that, and that's good. But it also does these things and they're not so good. We don't approve of that. So you can abstain there. You're basically saying, look, we can't support the bill because it's got these things in it which are really bad. But we're not going to vote against it because then that's like we're voting against all the elements of it which are really good. There's an argument for that. But if you're saying a bill cannot function at a basic level, why would you not vote against it? So this was Starmer putting pressure on the far right as much as Sunak. It was a veiled threat to point out how ridiculous they will look if they help this bill through the vote tonight after having trashed it utterly in public. You know, the best line from Starmer was when he was painting Sunak as someone who never believed in the plan in the first place. You know, how he tried to stop it in its tracks as Chancellor. Starmer was essentially asking what the rest of us have asked. Why on earth didn't Sunak drop it as Prime Minister? He then described the effect of Sunak allowing the Rwandan plan to survive as causing his party to look like hundreds of bald men scrapping over a broken comb. Another good line was to say that spending £400 million on a plan to not get anyone to Rwanda is not a plan. He said only this government could waste hundreds of millions of pounds on a removals policy that doesn't remove anyone. And in pointing out that Sunak didn't really believe in the policy and highlighting that Tory MPs have been disparaging their own record in office, citing Danny Kruger once more, he asked why, if Sunak's own MPs don't believe in his record, why should the public? And Stephen Flynn for the SNP took a similar line, but he appealed to Sunak's own sense of purpose. He pointed out that people feel real anger towards the government and that the Tories were weaponising some of the most vulnerable in society. He noted that Sunak would soon be out of office, which even Sunak must realise at this point, and asked if this is really what he wanted his legacy to be. A wasted appeal, I feel. There are some decent people who emerge from the top private schools in the country somehow, but they have such a focus on dehumanising students that many of their alumni simply do not regard ordinary people as people. They don't feel pain in the way you or I do. That is essentially how they're taught to think. And Sunak is a product of this education. In terms of how I see things going tonight, like I keep saying, it's very hard to predict when you're talking about, how are a group of chimps going to react to a particular situation. But it's not in their interest to see the bill fail. But like as I've also said, it's not in their interest to be supporting it either. They look incredibly stupid if they vote for it. It would be different if the amendments that they were backing were being presented as like improvements or fail-safes, like the bill. Well, the bill's got the right general idea, but we just worry it might, there might be this stumbling block or that stumbling block. These amendments should deal with it. But that's not how they were presenting it. They fully committed themselves by saying the bill cannot succeed, not may fail, cannot succeed without these amendments. Well, it's not going to get those amendments. So if everyone who voted for the cash and generic amendment were to abstain tonight, then especially taking into account the several who've actually said they're going to vote against it, the bill probably fails. I mean, the 61 MPs who do not want to look foolish by voting for the bill, but some have to, otherwise they risk bringing down the government by mistake. And the election which would follow, whenever it would be, it's not just that it would hasten that election. That election will be made all the harder for the Tories because they've dumped all of their political capital into making this Rwanda plan their main platform for the next election. They sort of know it's not actually going to work. It's not going to work. But they're setting it up to be their main platform for the election. Too late to jump ship on that now. So if they blow a giant hole in their own platform, well, what can you say? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.